You think you know medieval history. Knights in shining armor, courtly love, and chaste maidens locked away in towers? But what if I told you that everything you learned about medieval sexuality was a carefully sanitized fairy tale? What if the reality was so bizarre, so publicly invasive, so utterly shocking that it would make modern society look prudish by comparison? Tonight, we're diving into the dark underbelly of medieval intimate practices that historians have buried for centuries. We're talking about a world where your most private moments became public spectacles, where religious authorities owned massive entertainment empires while preaching purity, and where the bedroom became a courtroom, with judges examining your most intimate capabilities. I've spent months digging through medieval court records, church documents, and medical texts that most academics won't even touch. What I have uncovered will fundamentally change how you see the Middle Ages forever. This isn't the sanitized version they taught you in school. This is the raw, unfiltered truth about how our ancestors turned intimacy into public theater. Here's what most people don't realize. Medieval society wasn't sexually repressed. They were sexually obsessed. Every aspect of intimate life that we consider intensely private was regulated, witnessed, documented, and judged by entire communities. Privacy as we understand it simply didn't exist. Your bedroom was everyone's business, and failure to perform could cost you everything. We're about to journey through 7 levels of medieval intimate insanity that will make you grateful for every freedom you take for granted. From courtroom examinations that would horrify modern audiences to wedding night rituals that required noble witnesses, from religious contradictions that defy comprehension to medical practices that risked lives in pursuit of satisfaction. But before we dive into this historical nightmare, let me give you fair warning. What you're about to hear isn't taught in any classroom because, frankly, it's too disturbing for mainstream education. These aren't isolated incidents or rare exceptions. These were systematic practices that shaped medieval society for centuries, and the evidence is all there, preserved in the dusty archives waiting for anyone brave enough to look. So buckle up, because this journey through medieval sexuality will shatter every assumption you've ever had about the past. By the end of this series, you'll understand why privacy in intimate matters isn't some natural human right, but a modern miracle that took centuries to develop. Let's start with the most humiliating legal proceeding in human history. Picture this scene from 14th century York, England. John Sanderson stands trembling in a specially designed courthouse chamber while multiple certified examiners prepare to assess his most intimate capabilities. Court scribes sharpen their quills, ready to document every detail. Nobles and clergy fill the wooden benches, whispering among themselves as they wait for the proceedings to begin. This wasn't some bizarre one-off event. This was standard legal procedure across medieval Europe, known as fitness trials. If your spouse claimed you couldn't fulfill your marital duties, you'd face a public trial where failure meant losing your marriage, your dowry, and your entire social standing. The examination chamber was a stone room with high windows and a raised platform where the accused would stand. The certified inspectors, usually experienced medical practitioners selected by the court, would arrive wearing their official badges of office. The process was methodical and horrifying. First, the person would be examined while court officials watched from their benches. The evaluation would begin with physical assessments using methods documented in surviving court records. Examiners had specific time requirements, usually lengthy evaluations lasting hours. Everything was recorded by court scribes who documented physical condition, responsiveness to various stimuli, and overall fitness for marriage. The documented cases reveal the brutal reality of these trials. In 1392, Walter Deonte faced 3 separate examinations over the course of a month, each more invasive than the last. Court records show he failed all 3 attempts despite medical intervention. Pierre de Franville in 1450 Paris succeeded only on his 3rd attempt, and only after consuming dangerous herbal remedies that could cause permanent damage or death. The performance pressure was so intense that men would risk poisoning themselves rather than face the social destruction of a failed trial. Multiple attempts were technically allowed, but each failure exponentially destroyed your reputation. Witnesses included legal officials, medical experts who conducted examinations, notaries who recorded every detail, and often the spouse's family members who had financial stakes in the outcome. Here's what most people don't realize about why this insanity was considered necessary. Marriage in medieval times was fundamentally an economic contract, and consummation was required to make it legally binding. The Church's theological position held that procreation was the primary purpose of marriage. A marriage without the possibility of children was considered invalid under canon law inherited from Roman legal traditions. Medieval medical understanding viewed intimate dysfunction as either a disease requiring treatment or a curse requiring spiritual intervention. Women actually had legal rights to marital satisfaction, something that might surprise modern audiences. The Church taught that both partners had obligations to fulfill when requested. A person who couldn't perform was literally failing their legal duties. Statistical evidence from court records suggests there were over 200 fitness trials per decade in major cities like London, Paris, and Florence. The success rate for maintaining marriages after being accused was less than 30%. The social consequences extended far beyond the immediate couple. Entire family alliances could crumble, dowries would be returned, and business partnerships would dissolve. But fitness trials were just the beginning of medieval society's obsession with public intimacy. If you thought having your capabilities examined in court was invasive, imagine if your wedding night itself required an audience of nobles to verify consummation. In 1445, Margaret of Anjou married King Henry VI of England. She was 15 years old. On her wedding night, 23 nobles, clergy members, and court officials crowded into the royal bedchamber to witness the consummation. They weren't just present in the building or waiting outside. They were in the actual room, positioned around the curtained bed, listening for sounds and watching for movement that would indicate successful union. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood at the foot of the bed, blessing the union while the young couple attempted intimacy for the first time. Without this witness consummation, the marriage that united England and France would be considered invalid. The ceremonial preparation process was a horror show of public humiliation disguised as celebration. First came the undressing ritual where the bride and groom would be disrobed by their respective relatives, while wedding guests sang songs and made crude jokes. Every item of clothing removed was accompanied by cheers and inappropriate comments. The bride's mother and aunts would remove her dress, commenting on her body's readiness for childbearing. The groom's male relatives would undress him while making jokes about his capabilities and offering last-minute advice on technique. Then came the procession to the bedchamber. The couple would be led through corridors filled with drunk wedding guests who would throw things at them, supposedly for fertility but often just for humiliation. They'd be forced to drink blessed wine mixed with allegedly enhancement herbs and eat special foods like oysters and honey cakes, all while enduring constant commentary from the crowd. The priest would bless the bed itself, sprinkling holy water on the sheets where consummation would occur. Special prayers would be said for fertility, for the woman to conceive quickly, and for the man to perform adequately. The curtains around the bed would be drawn, but they were often thin enough to see shadows and movement. Witnesses would position themselves strategically around the room, some near the bed to hear sounds, others by the door to prevent anyone from leaving before completion. The royal examples are the most well-documented and horrifying. When Catherine of Aragon married Prince Arthur in 1501, 6 high-ranking nobles were required to witness the consummation. The Spanish ambassador insisted on being present to ensure the alliance between England and Spain was properly sealed. When Arthur emerged from the bedchamber the next morning, he famously declared he had been in Spain and demanded ale because marriage is thirsty work. Whether he actually consummated the marriage became a matter of international dispute decades later during Henry VIII's annulment proceedings. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's wedding night in 1770 was even worse. The Archbishop of Reims stood in the bedroom along with various French nobles while the teenage couple fumbled through their first intimate experience. Court records indicate it took 7 years before they successfully consummated the marriage. 7 years of repeated public attempts with witnesses present. When Margaret Tudor married the King of Scotland at age 13, Scottish nobles literally insisted on watching to ensure the English princess was properly claimed for Scotland. Witnesses reported hearing her distress, whether from pain, fear, or the horror of public consummation we'll never know. The political nature of these marriages meant that every moment was a matter of state importance. The verification methods went beyond just witnessing the act itself. The next morning brought fresh humiliations. The sheets would be displayed publicly, hung from windows, or paraded through the castle. The bride would be examined by midwives who would check for physical signs of consummation, then swear legal oaths about what they found. These testimonies were recorded in official documents that survive to this day. Witnesses would provide detailed testimony about what they heard and saw. Movement of the bed curtains consistent with vigorous activity appears in multiple historical accounts. Sounds indicating completion of the marital act was considered ideal evidence. Some witnesses were required to stay all night to ensure multiple attempts at consummation. If the couple failed to produce adequate evidence of success, they might be forced to try again the next night, with even more witnesses present. Failed consummations led to immediate annulment proceedings with catastrophic political and economic consequences. Alliances between nations could crumble, dowries would be disputed, and succession crises could trigger wars. The pressure on young, inexperienced couples to perform intimately in front of audiences was inhuman. Political marriages were the foundation of medieval diplomacy, and an unconsummated marriage was legally void. It didn't count. Inheritance law demanded absolute proof that marriages were real and consummated. The virginity of noble brides was considered a valuable political asset that needed to be publicly transferred to ensure legitimacy. This system of witnessed consummation reveals just how foreign the concept of intimate privacy was to medieval minds. What we consider the most private moment between two people was treated as a public ceremony requiring official verification. The idea that intimacy should be between consenting adults without outside interference would have seemed absurd to medieval society. But here's where medieval sexual practices get truly insane. The same religious authorities who demanded witnessed consummations and blessed marriage beds were simultaneously running massive entertainment empires that would make modern adult industries look like amateur operations. The Bishop of Winchester didn't just tolerate such establishments. He owned and operated the largest network in medieval England. 18 separate facilities in Southwark, just across the Thames from London, employed over 1,000 women known as Winchester geese. These weren't hidden back alley operations. They had official signs, published price lists, and the bishop's coat of arms displayed prominently above the doors. The profits from these establishments funded the construction and maintenance of Winchester Cathedral. Every prayer uttered in that holy space, every hymn sung to God's glory was literally paid for by the entertainment industry. The hypocrisy was so staggering it defies modern comprehension, but it gets worse. Much worse. And what we're about to uncover next will show you just how deep this rabbit hole of medieval sexual insanity really goes. The Winchester operation was a sophisticated business empire that would make modern corporations envious. The establishments weren't random houses scattered across the district. They were purpose-built facilities located in Southwark's Liberty of the Clink, an area under the bishop's direct jurisdiction where English law couldn't interfere. The buildings had distinctive architecture with large windows facing the street where women would display themselves to attract customers. The famous Boar's Head establishment could accommodate over 100 customers per night. The Cardinal's Hat specialized in higher-class clientele, charging premium rates for what they called clean women, certified disease-free by the bishop's own physicians. The White Hart catered to merchants and travelers, while smaller facilities served local laborers and apprentices. The bishop's officials maintained detailed records that survived in church archives, and what they reveal is breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Weekly profit reports showed earnings of 20 to 40 pounds per establishment, equivalent to hundreds of thousands in modern currency. The licensing system was remarkably bureaucratic. Women needed official permits renewed annually for a fee. They paid weekly sin taxes directly to church coffers. Special fees were charged for working on holy days, though such activities were technically banned during Lent, a ban widely ignored with payment of additional fines. The recruitment system was especially disturbing. The annual goose fair was ostensibly a hiring fair for domestic servants, but everyone knew its real purpose. Young women from the countryside would arrive seeking work, only to find the best-paying positions were in the bishop's establishments. Church officials would assess women for attractiveness and health, directing the most appealing to the premium facilities while sending others to lower-tier operations. But Winchester wasn't unique. It was just the best documented. In Avignon, the papal entertainment complex operated directly under Vatican control during the Avignon papacy. The Pope's treasurers collected taxes that funded papal armies and lavish court ceremonies. The building still stands today, its papal coat of arms carved in stone above the entrance. Church records show it employed over 200 women at its peak, with special rooms reserved for visiting church dignitaries. German bishop establishments formed virtual chains across the Holy Roman Empire. The Archbishop of Mainz controlled similar operations in 6 different cities. The Bishop of Strasbourg owned 4 establishments within sight of his cathedral spires. These weren't secret operations. They advertised openly, competed for customers, and paid their taxes directly to church treasuries. Spanish cathedral operations were often built into the cathedral complex itself. In Seville, the cathedral's entertainment facility occupied a building connected to the church by underground tunnels. Priests could visit without being seen in public. The women were required to attend special masses, sitting in designated areas while being preached to about the very activities they'd engage in later that evening. Multiple church councils attempted reform, but the economic reality made change impossible. The Council of Constance in 1414 tried to ban clerical ownership of entertainment establishments. The attending bishops arrived with an entourage of 700 women from the industry. The reform motion failed spectacularly. The Council of Basel in 1431 issued stern condemnations of clerical involvement in adult entertainment. The condemning documents were written in rooms above the city's largest such establishment, owned by the local bishop. The theological justification for this blatant hypocrisy reveals the twisted logic of medieval Christianity. Church fathers cited Augustine's doctrine that such activities were a necessary evil, like sewers, unpleasant but required for a functioning city. Thomas Aquinas argued that these services prevented worse behaviors like assault, adultery, and other offenses. By controlling and regulating such activities, bishops claimed they were actually protecting public morality. The economic reality was simpler. The church needed money, cathedrals were expensive, bishops lived like princes, wars required funding. Entertainment taxes were reliable income streams that couldn't be disrupted by poor harvests or trade disputes. Some historians estimate that such revenues provided 20 to 30% of church income in major cities. The Bishop of Winchester's entertainment empire alone generated enough annual revenue to build a new church every year. The profit margins were staggering. A typical transaction might cost the customer 4 pence. The woman would keep 1 penny. The establishment would take 1 penny for overhead, and 2 pence would go directly to church coffers. Multiply this by thousands of transactions per week across hundreds of church-owned establishments, and you understand why reform was impossible. The medieval church was literally addicted to entertainment revenue. Each transaction was taxed, with the church taking typically 30 to 40% of gross revenues. The bishop's physicians would conduct weekly medical inspections, checking for visible signs of disease. Women who passed received official stamps of approval. Those who failed were banned from working until cleared, though they could pay bribes to continue operating. Protection services were another revenue stream. The bishop's guards would patrol the entertainment districts, preventing violence against the women for a fee. They also ensured customers paid their bills, acting as medieval collection agents. Women could purchase retirement funds, essentially insurance policies that would provide for them when they could no longer work. Of course, few lived long enough to collect, but here's what most people don't realize. This wasn't seen as particularly scandalous at the time. The separation between religious authority and economic activity that we take for granted didn't exist. Bishops were major landowners, tax collectors, and business operators. Owning entertainment establishments was just another revenue stream like collecting mill taxes or road tolls. The same bishop who preached against immorality on Sunday would review his establishment profits on Monday without any sense of contradiction. The social control aspect was equally important. By controlling such activities, the church controlled society itself. They decided who could sell services where, when, and for how much. They created categories of honest versus dishonest providers. They enforced dress codes that marked workers as separate from respectable women. The establishments became tools of social engineering, channeling male desires into regulated, taxable channels. This system lasted for centuries because it served everyone's interests except the women trapped within it. The church got revenue, men got services, and society got the illusion of moral order. The fact that countless women suffered and died to maintain this system was simply considered the cost of doing business. This makes modern church scandals look absolutely quaint by comparison. Today's religious leaders caught in inappropriate situations at least try to hide their activities. Medieval bishops put their coat of arms on establishment doors. They didn't just tolerate adult entertainment. They industrialized it, regulated it, and profited from it on a massive scale. The hypocrisy wasn't hidden. It was institutionalized at the highest levels of religious authority. And this contradiction between preached morality and practiced economics reveals something fundamental about medieval society. They didn't see sexuality as something to be repressed or hidden. They saw it as something to be controlled, regulated, and monetized, but the church's intimate contradictions went even deeper. While bishops counted profits from entertainment establishments, the same religious authorities were literally prescribing physical satisfaction as medical treatment. According to medieval medical theory, your great-great-grandmother couldn't get pregnant without experiencing climax. This wasn't some fringe belief, it was accepted medical fact taught in universities and written in medical textbooks used across Europe. The two-seed theory held that conception required contributions from both partners, and women only released their contribution during peak experience. If a woman couldn't reach satisfaction, she couldn't conceive. This meant husbands were medically required to master intimate techniques. Physicians taught detailed stimulation methods, and midwives provided hands-on instruction to struggling couples. Medieval doctors were literally prescribing satisfaction centuries before anyone understood female anatomy properly. The medical theory came from ancient Greek physician Galen, whose ideas dominated medieval medicine for over 1,000 years. He taught that women had internal reproductive organs that produced female seed necessary for conception. Just as men released their contribution through climax, women needed to reach peak experience to release theirs. The medieval medical establishment took this further, creating elaborate theories about the nature of female response. Hot-natured women needed different techniques than cold-natured ones. Moist-humored women required different positions than dry-humored ones. The complexity rivaled modern intimate instruction manuals, but with absolutely no basis in actual anatomy. Medical texts provided exhaustively detailed instructions that would make modern therapists blush. The most popular was the Trotula, a compilation of women's medicine that included specific techniques for achieving female satisfaction. Physicians recommended gentle stimulation with sweet-smelling oils and careful attention to sensitive areas. They described optimal positions: woman on top for cold constitutions, sideways for tilted anatomy, alternative arrangements for women with excessive moisture. The clinical precision is startling from an era we assume knew nothing about female response. Physicians developed tools and techniques that would shock modern audiences. They prescribed specially designed warming devices, essentially medieval stimulation aids made from polished wood or ivory. Herbal preparations containing mint, pennyroyal, and other heating herbs were applied before intimacy to increase sensitivity. Massage oils with cinnamon and pepper were used to increase blood flow. Some physicians recommended musical accompaniment, believing certain rhythms encouraged female arousal. The most elaborate treatments involved complex rituals combining multiple sensory experiences designed to awaken female desire. The practical applications of this theory created a bizarre medical specialty. Midwives became intimate coaches, teaching couples bedroom techniques with startling frankness. They used illustrated manuscripts showing positions designed to maximize female pleasure. They demonstrated manual techniques on cloth models. Some even provided supervised practice sessions where they would coach couples through intimacy, offering real-time advice on rhythm, pressure, and positioning. This level of medical intervention in intimate matters reveals just how seriously medieval society took the connection between female satisfaction and successful conception. It wasn't enough for couples to figure things out themselves. The community had a vested interest in ensuring proper technique was employed. After all, heirs were essential for family continuity, economic stability, and political alliances. The contradictions this created with religious doctrine were mind-bending. Pleasure for its own sake was sinful, but pleasure for procreation was mandatory. Confessors had to thread an impossible needle, condemning women who enjoyed intimacy too much, while also condemning those who didn't enjoy it enough to conceive. Some theological debates raged about whether experiencing pleasure during conception made the resulting child more sinful or blessed. But the most disturbing aspect of medieval intimate practices was yet to come. Because while the church prescribed satisfaction for married women, unmarried women faced a completely different reality. One that involved ingredients so shocking, so dangerous, that it makes every modern dating horror story look like a fairy tale. The underground networks of medieval contraception reveal a world where desperate women risked everything to control their fertility. These weren't the sanitized folk remedies you might imagine from historical fiction. We're talking about ingredients that read like a serial killer's shopping list, methods that could end your life faster than the unwanted pregnancy they were meant to prevent. Picture this scene from a 14th century marketplace. A young merchant's wife approaches an herb seller, whispering coded phrases that indicate she needs something special. The seller glances around nervously before producing a small leather pouch from beneath her cart. Inside are substances that would horrify modern pharmacists. Mercury compounds that could cause organ failure, lead salts that induced madness, and organic materials so toxic they required careful handling just to avoid accidental poisoning. The barrier methods reveal desperate ingenuity mixed with dangerous ignorance. Crocodile dung wasn't randomly chosen for medieval pessaries. Its alkaline nature actually does have contraceptive properties, which Egyptian medical texts from 1850 BCE had documented. Medieval physicians copied ancient wisdom without understanding why it sometimes worked. The problem was sourcing. Most European women couldn't exactly pop down to the local crocodile farm. Instead, they used whatever animal waste was available, telling themselves it was the exotic variety. Horse, cow, and pig waste became substitutes, introducing dangerous bacteria that could cause fatal infections. Archaeological evidence from medieval latrines shows unusual concentrations of animal feces mixed with textile fibers, suggesting widespread use of these improvised barriers. Honey and plant gum combinations were slightly less lethal but still risky. Acacia gum ferments into acid, which does have contraceptive properties. Mixed with honey's antibacterial qualities, it created a barrier that had some effectiveness. Women would soak wool or linen in this mixture, forming primitive devices that required careful timing and removal. Medical texts describe women dying from toxic shock when improvised barriers became lodged internally. Sea sponges soaked in various acidic substances were the most sophisticated barrier method available. Women would use vinegar, lemon juice, or wine as soaking solutions. The acidity could prevent conception while the sponge created a physical barrier. Mediterranean women had access to natural sea sponges, while Northern European women used whatever absorbent materials they could find. Moss, rags, even bread soaked in acidic solutions. The practice required precise timing and careful removal, with infection being a constant risk. One surviving letter from a French noblewoman to her daughter warns about leaving sponges in place too long, describing symptoms that sound like severe sepsis. The fact that such detailed warnings were necessary tells us how common these dangerous practices had become. Animal membrane barriers represent the closest thing to modern protection medieval women could access. Sheep intestines, fish bladders, and pig bladders were cleaned, stretched, and sometimes sewn into protective sheaths. These were expensive, reusable, and primarily available to wealthy families who could afford such luxuries. They were secured with ribbons and had to be soaked in warm milk or water before use. The Catholic Church condemned them absolutely, calling them armor against God's will. Users faced excommunication if discovered, which meant risking not just physical health, but eternal damnation for the sake of family planning. The toxic interventions women subjected themselves to reveal the absolute desperation of facing unwanted pregnancy in a world where childbirth could easily mean death. Mercury-based potions were known to prevent pregnancy by slowly poisoning the woman's entire system. Physicians prescribed small doses, claiming they cooled the womb and prevented conception. Women experiencing mercury poisoning suffered tremors, tooth loss, and gradual madness. But it did prevent pregnancy, either through direct toxicity or because dying women don't conceive. Skeletal analysis from medieval cemeteries shows young women with lethal levels of mercury concentration, likely from contraceptive use rather than occupational exposure. Lead salts were equally horrific but more readily available. Women would drink solutions containing lead compounds known as sugar of lead for their deceptively sweet taste. Others used lead-based applications, believing the metal's weight would prevent conception. The resulting lead poisoning caused severe abdominal pain, constipation, and eventually brain damage that medieval physicians called the creeping death. Copper sulfate applications were recommended by Arabic medical texts translated into Latin during the 12th century. Women would irrigate internally with copper solutions after intimacy, believing the metal's properties would prevent implantation. While copper does have contraceptive effects, the concentrations used caused severe chemical burns that often proved fatal. Medical texts describe women suffering permanent scarring and infection from these treatments. One physician in Toledo documented treating dozens of women for copper poisoning, noting that most died within days of beginning the regimen. Yet, demand for these treatments remained high because the alternative seemed worse than the cure. The herbal cocktails were marginally safer but still potentially lethal without proper dosing knowledge. Pennyroyal tea could prevent implantation but also caused liver failure in higher concentrations. Rue, Queen Anne's lace, and tansy were commonly used but required precise measurements that few women possessed. Too little was ineffective, leaving women with unwanted pregnancies after risking their health. Too much was fatal, causing hemorrhaging and organ failure. Women shared recipes like closely guarded secrets. 7 seeds of Queen Anne's lace chewed daily, or rue tea drunk during menstruation. The margin between contraceptive effect and lethal poison was razor thin. Desperate mothers would pass down these deadly recipes to their daughters like family heirlooms, each generation adding modifications based on tragic experience. One surviving manuscript from a German convent contains detailed notes about herbal dosages, written in code to avoid detection by church authorities who considered such knowledge evidence of witchcraft. The magical methods seem absurd to modern minds, but were taken seriously by desperate women who had exhausted medical options. Weasel reproductive organ amulets were worn around the thigh during intimacy, but the organs had to be harvested during specific moon phases and preserved in honey according to elaborate rituals. Mule earwax mixed with honey was applied internally based on sympathetic magic principles. Since mules were sterile, their bodily substances were believed to transfer that sterility to women. The black market in mule parts for contraceptive purposes was documented in several witchcraft trials, revealing extensive underground networks. Dead infant hands, preferably from unbaptized babies, were worn as amulets around the waist. The logic was that death would prevent new life from taking root. The market in infant corpses for contraceptive magic was so extensive that graveyards required guards, and midwives were sometimes accused of deliberately allowing babies to die to supply this gruesome trade. Menstrual blood rituals occupied a strange space between magic and primitive science. Women would save their monthly flow, dry it, powder it, and secretly feed it to their husbands in wine or food. The theory was that consuming female essence would reduce male potency, though the practice more likely caused digestive illness than contraceptive effects. Some women burned their used menstrual rags and used the ashes as internal applications. Others believed that intimacy during menstruation would prevent future pregnancies, a practice condemned by the church as especially sinful but still widely practiced based on observed correlations. The desperation driving these dangerous choices stemmed from medieval women's impossible situations. Repeated pregnancies destroyed women's bodies faster than warfare destroyed men's. The average woman who survived to menopause had experienced 8 to 12 pregnancies, with many more ending in miscarriage or stillbirth. Childbirth was the leading cause of death for young women, claiming more lives than plague in most years. Poor families couldn't feed additional children, leading to infanticide or abandonment that carried severe legal and spiritual penalties. Yet the church condemned all contraception as interference with divine will, and husbands had legal rights to intimate access that wives couldn't refuse. The knowledge networks that preserved and transmitted contraceptive information were entirely female and entirely underground. Midwives passed recipes to apprentices through oral tradition. Wise women sold herbs and instructions while maintaining plausible deniability about their intended use. Women in entertainment establishments shared professional knowledge that kept them working longer. Ironically, convents became centers of contraceptive expertise. Nuns who provided medical care needed to know what desperate women might have tried in order to treat the resulting complications. Some convents maintained extensive herb gardens and medical libraries that preserved contraceptive knowledge under the guise of general healing arts. This underground economy of reproductive knowledge operated despite severe legal and religious prohibition. Women caught with contraceptive materials faced accusations of witchcraft. Those who survived dangerous treatments rarely spoke about their experiences. The knowledge was precious, dangerous, and passed down through whispered conversations and coded manuscripts. Male refusal to practice withdrawal created much of the contraceptive burden that fell on women. While withdrawal was also condemned by the church, it at least didn't risk poisoning or internal injury. But men who refused this simple method forced women into increasingly dangerous alternatives that could cost them their lives. Court records show women begging husbands to practice restraint and being beaten for the suggestion. The gender dynamics of contraceptive responsibility reveal how little has changed across centuries. Women bore the physical risks of both pregnancy and prevention while men maintained sexual privileges without consequence. The survival rates for medieval contraceptive practices were appallingly low, but desperation made even slim chances seem worthwhile. Modern birth control seems miraculous by comparison, safe, effective, and legal. We've forgotten that for most of history, preventing pregnancy meant playing Russian roulette with your life every single month. But preventing pregnancy was nothing compared to the lengths medieval women went to secure it. Because while some women risked death to avoid conception, others were literally digging up corpses to ensure it happened with the right partner. The medieval pursuit of love makes modern dating horror stories look like romantic comedies. The shopping list for medieval love potions reads like evidence from a serial killer's basement. Ground bones from unbaptized infants, organs from recently executed criminals, bodily fluids harvested during intimate encounters, brain tissue from doves killed at midnight, and powdered human heart. These weren't metaphorical ingredients or poetic exaggerations. Women literally robbed graves, bribed executioners for fresh corpse parts, and collected their own secretions in pursuit of love. Medieval romance required actual necromancy. The human ingredients demanded careful sourcing and preparation that would make modern forensic investigators sick. Children's bone marrow was considered most potent, especially from children who died before baptism. The theological logic was twisted but consistent. Unbaptized souls were trapped between worlds, making their physical remains powerful conduits for earthly magic. Women would bribe gravediggers or sneak into cemeteries themselves to harvest fresh bones. The marrow had to be extracted within 3 days of burial using heated needles, a process that required breaking into crypts and desecrating corpses while avoiding night watchmen. The extracted marrow would be dried over low fires, ground into powder, and mixed with honey and wine. The resulting potion would be slipped into a target's drink over several weeks. Menstrual blood collection required months of planning and absolute secrecy. Women saved their monthly flow in special vessels, often ceramic pots marked with symbols to distinguish them from cooking containers. The blood would be dried into cakes that could be ground into powder or used fresh and mixed directly into food and wine. Some recipes required blood from specific days of the cycle, with the heaviest flow considered most potent. Others demanded the blood be collected during certain moon phases, adding astronomical complexity to an already revolting process. The most elaborate rituals involved mixing menstrual blood with other bodily fluids collected after intimate encounters, creating potions from the mingled essences of both partners. Hair harvesting happened during or immediately after intimate encounters when targets were most vulnerable. Women would secretly collect their lover's hair, saving individual strands in lockets or sewn into clothing. The hair would later be burned with specific incenses to bind the man's soul, ground into powder for secret consumption, or woven into amulets worn against the skin. Some recipes required hair from both partners braided together during specific lunar phases. Others demanded the hair be collected without the man's knowledge, adding layers of deception to intimate moments. The belief was that hair contained the person's essence, making it a powerful component for controlling their emotions and desires. Corpse organ preparation was a specialized skill that created an entire underground economy. The organs had to come from someone who died violently, with executed criminals being preferred and suicide victims ranking second. Natural deaths were considered useless because peaceful souls had already departed, leaving behind empty flesh. Executioners developed lucrative side businesses selling organs to desperate women. Hearts were most expensive, followed by brains, then reproductive organs. The preparation process was gruesome and dangerous. Organs would be dried slowly over low heat, then ground with specific herbs like verveine and mandrake root. The powder would be mixed into food over time, supposedly creating irresistible attraction in the consumer. The preparation rituals surrounding these ingredients were as elaborate as the components were disturbing. Midnight cemetery expeditions required specific timing based on lunar cycles. New moon phases were preferred for binding spells, while full moon energy was considered ideal for attraction magic. Women would recite incantations while harvesting materials, often elaborate Latin phrases they didn't understand, but had memorized phonetically. The mixing had to happen at crossroads or in churchyards, locations where the boundaries between worlds were considered thin. Some recipes required the woman to be completely unclothed during preparation, believing that naked flesh enhanced magical potency. Others demanded she wear her target's clothing to create sympathetic connections. Full moon timing was considered essential for most love magic, with grimoires providing detailed astronomical charts showing optimal collection and preparation times. Ingredients gathered under the wrong moon phase were considered not just useless but actively dangerous, potentially causing madness or death in both the preparer and the target. Women would plan their activities months in advance, waiting for perfect celestial alignments to create their potions. Some kept detailed calendars marking upcoming opportunities, treating love magic like any other complex craft requiring precise timing and preparation. The incantations were bizarre mixtures of church Latin, folk charms, and pure nonsense. A typical example from a 14th century grimoire reads, Sanguis morti per sanguinem menstruum, cor amantis per ossa infantis. Women who couldn't read would memorize these phrases phonetically, often garbling them beyond recognition. The power was believed to lie in the ritual performance rather than linguistic accuracy. Dosage calculations reveal surprising sophistication among medieval love magic practitioners. Grimoires provided detailed instructions on how much potion to administer based on the target's size, temperament, and perceived resistance level. Too little would be ineffective, leaving the woman with dangerous ingredients and no results. Too much could cause madness, illness, or death, turning love magic into accidental murder. Women kept careful records of doses and effects, adjusting their recipes based on results like primitive chemists. Some became known as love magic specialists, selling their services to other desperate women and developing reputations that spread across regions. These practitioners maintained detailed client records and ingredient supplies that would rival modern pharmacies. The legal consequences for practicing love magic were severe but inconsistently enforced, creating a dangerous lottery for practitioners. The church considered it a form of witchcraft, even punishable by excommunication or death. Secular authorities treated it as poisoning if the target became ill, but enforcement depended entirely on social status and outcomes. Noble women caught using love potions might face penance and temporary exile. Poor women faced execution, often burned alive as witches. The disparity reveals how class privilege protected even the most heinous magical practices when performed by the wealthy. Specific prosecutions reveal the widespread nature of these practices across medieval Europe. In Montaigu, multiple women were tried for love magic between 1308 and 1325. Their testimonies provide detailed accounts of recipes and rituals that survived in court records. In Venice, a network of women selling love potions was exposed in 1480, revealing a sophisticated operation with standardized ingredients and pricing structures. London court records showed dozens of love magic cases annually throughout the medieval period, suggesting the practice was endemic rather than exceptional. The punishments varied wildly based on circumstances and outcomes. Women whose potions appeared to work might face lighter sentences than those whose targets became ill or died. Noble women could often commute death sentences to exile or convent imprisonment, while poor women had no such options. The most creative punishment came from Augsburg, where convicted love potion makers were forced to publicly consume their own concoctions. If they survived, it was considered proof the ingredients were harmless. If they died, it served as public entertainment and deterrent to other potential practitioners. Success rate claims in grimoires were obviously exaggerated, but court testimonies suggest some psychological effectiveness. Men who knew they'd been targeted with love magic often reported feeling attracted against their will. The placebo effect combined with the power of suggestion created real behavioral changes that seemed to validate the practice. Some successful cases might simply have been coincidence where the target was already interested, and the potion provided the woman with confidence to act on mutual attraction. The ritual preparation and ingredient investment created psychological commitment that translated into more aggressive romantic pursuit. Victim testimonies from court records provide disturbing insights into the effects of love magic. Men reported feeling unnaturally drawn to women they had previously ignored. They described physical symptoms including racing hearts, inability to concentrate, and inappropriate arousal that disrupted their daily lives. Whether from actual poisoning, psychological suggestion, or the nocebo effect, targets experienced real distress that reinforced belief in magical effectiveness. Some men became genuinely ill from consuming unknown substances, while others suffered psychological breakdown from believing they were under supernatural influence. The desperation driving women to these extremes reflects the brutal realities of medieval marriage markets. Women had extremely limited options for economic security outside marriage. An unmarried woman passed her prime faced poverty and social exile. Widow remarriage was often the only alternative to destitution, making love magic seem like a reasonable investment in survival. The economic motivations went far beyond simple survival needs. Marriage to a wealthy merchant or minor noble could transform a woman's entire family's fortunes. The difference between marrying a successful craftsman versus a day laborer meant the difference between comfort and starvation for generations. Love potions were investments in economic futures that seemed worth the risk of execution. Classical tradition heavily influenced medieval love magic practices. Ovid's Art of Love described various potions and spells that medieval practitioners adapted. Greek magical papyri provided templates that grimoire writers copied and modified. The connection to classical authority gave love magic a veneer of respectability that helped practitioners justify their actions. If ancient poets and philosophers wrote about love magic, how sinful could it really be? This classical legitimacy helped love magic persist despite religious condemnation, creating space for continued practice under academic pretenses. Folk medicine and love magic overlapped considerably, allowing practitioners to obtain ingredients under medical pretenses. Many components in love potions had legitimate medicinal uses that provided cover for their magical applications. Dove's blood was used to treat epilepsy. Human bone marrow appeared in remedies for joint pain. This overlap allowed women to purchase dangerous substances without immediately arousing suspicion. An apothecary selling dove brains for headache treatment couldn't know they'd end up in love potions. Herb sellers provided mandrake root for pain relief without asking why customers needed such large quantities. This medical camouflage helped sustain the underground love magic economy for centuries. The gender dynamics of love potion use revealed deep inequalities in medieval romantic agency. While both men and women used love magic, prosecutions overwhelmingly targeted women. Male practitioners were often classified as learned magicians rather than witches, their activities viewed as scholarly pursuits rather than desperate romantic manipulation. Women's love magic was seen as more threatening because it subverted natural male authority. A woman controlling a man through supernatural means, it inverted the proper social order that placed men in dominant positions. This gender bias in prosecution meant women faced far harsher consequences for identical practices. Church positions on love magic were complex and contradictory, revealing institutional hypocrisy at the highest levels. While officially condemning all magic as diabolical, some clergy provided love charms and blessings to wealthy parishioners. Priests sold blessed candles and holy water specifically for use in love rituals. Some monasteries developed reputations for effective love magic that attracted pilgrims from across Europe. The Church's condemnation focused more on the diabolical aspects of love magic rather than the practice itself. Love magic that invoked Christian saints or used blessed materials was sometimes tolerated, while practices involving corpse parts or demonic invocations faced harsh punishment. This created confusing gray areas that practitioners exploited. The international trade in love magic ingredients created extensive criminal networks that operated across medieval Europe. Specialized suppliers provided exotic components to local practitioners. Corpse parts were smuggled between cities in wine barrels. Rare herbs traveled established trade routes alongside legitimate goods. Venice became a major hub for love magic supplies, with merchants importing ingredients from across the Mediterranean. Constantinople supplied Byzantine magical texts and exotic animal parts. North African traders provided rare minerals and preserved organs. This international commerce made love magic a truly global phenomenon. The psychological profiles of chronic love magic users reveal patterns of romantic obsession and control that persist across centuries. Many practitioners became addicted to the ritual preparation and the sense of power it provided. They would create increasingly elaborate potions for multiple targets, treating love magic like a hobby rather than desperate romantic strategy. Some women spent their entire inheritances on magical ingredients, bankrupting themselves in pursuit of romantic control. Others became so obsessed with perfect preparation that they never actually administered their potions, preferring the fantasy of power to the risk of failure. The lasting impact of medieval love magic on Western romantic culture is more significant than most people realize. The association of romantic pursuit with dangerous risk-taking persists in modern dating culture. The belief that love requires extreme effort and sacrifice echoes through centuries of romantic literature and popular culture. Modern pickup artist techniques and dating manipulation strategies are direct descendants of medieval love magic, replacing corpse ingredients with psychological manipulation, but maintaining the same fundamental belief that romantic attraction can be artificially created through systematic intervention. The transition from magical to psychological love manipulation represents evolution rather than elimination of these practices. We've replaced grave robbing with psychological profiling, corpse ingredients with calculated behavior modification, and supernatural incantations with neurolinguistic programming techniques. But while medieval women risked execution for their romantic manipulations, they at least had the excuse of desperate circumstances and limited options. Modern practitioners of romantic manipulation have access to safe legal dating methods, but choose deception and control instead. In some ways, medieval love magic seems more honest about its intentions than contemporary dating strategies. The ultimate irony? is that medieval love magic probably worked better than its practitioners realized, not through supernatural intervention, but through the confidence and commitment it created in the women who used it. The elaborate preparation rituals, dangerous ingredient collection, and months of planning created psychological investment that translated into more focused romantic pursuit. Women who believed they possessed magical advantages approached targets with confidence that was genuinely attractive. The ritual preparation provided structure and purpose to romantic campaigns that might otherwise have seemed hopeless. In this sense, love magic succeeded through self-fulfilling prophecy rather than supernatural intervention. But the transition from love magic to marriage was just the beginning of medieval society's intimate insanity. Because once couples were successfully united, medieval communities had developed public humiliation rituals for those who broke their vows that make modern cancel culture look like polite disagreement. The punishment for adultery involved literal rope bondage and community-wide torture sessions that could easily result in death. Think public shaming on social media is brutal? Medieval adulterers were stripped naked and forced to run through town while being whipped by entire communities. In southern France, they called it la course, the run. When adultery was discovered, the community didn't just gossip or impose social sanctions. They organized ritualized public humiliation that makes modern cancel culture look like gentle criticism. The guilty couple would be dragged from their beds at dawn and brought to the town square, where church bells summoned every citizen to witness their punishment. This wasn't mob justice or spontaneous community anger. It was organized punishment with established procedures, official supervision, and traditional routes that had been used for generations.